Hey, Bernardo Wealth Extended Family, talking to you today about the election. And a week ago, when John and I put the time on my calendar to shoot this video, I had no idea the things that would transpire to lead us into all these changes and events that recently happened. So as things have evolved, let's kind of talk about where we are. The first thing I think is most important is that looking back, and what's interesting is that we had Trump running against Biden, both of which were presidents in the past. Obviously, Biden, our current president, Trump, president before him. And so I think one of the things that is interesting to me is like they both have a track record. We both, with both of those candidates, there is somewhat of a predictable path and not a big unknown as to what are they going to do if they're president, right? Where in years and elections in the past, maybe you have an incumbent, maybe you have a challenger, but you're not sure what that challenger really is going to do if they win the office and sit in the role of president. The point in bringing that up is really, we talk about this a lot. The market doesn't like uncertainty. The market doesn't do well in times of uncertainty. That's what creates volatility. The market likes certainty. The market likes predictability. And so I think as we look at the election, we've got an element of that kind of built in, even though we don't know, kind of fast forward who would be the candidate. So again, a week ago, that was my perspective. Fast forward today with Biden dropping out of the race, Harris stepping in. I think that Harris is really a continuation of the Biden administration. And so I tend to feel the same, although I think there are some elements that could bring some uncertainty with a Harris presidency. So let's kind of talk about some of the bigger picture items and the differences between Trump presidency and Harris presidency, and really not to make it political, but more about just like, what do we think the effects on the market would be? So the first and probably biggest difference would be taxes, right? The Trump tax cuts are expected to expire in 2025. Obviously, if Harris wins, that is going to expire, in my humble opinion, and we will be in a higher, tax environment. Obviously, if Trump wins, taxes will stay the same, if not potentially go down further with some of the things he's proposing. So I think taxes, they do play a part. Regulation, obviously, President Biden has put a lot of regulation in, especially on the banks and financials. That's hamstrung that area of the market. President Trump obviously wants to deregulate a lot of that. It's kind of open things up, his pro-business stance. So I think that's another area of implication in terms of markets, which I'll kind of tie a bow around in a minute. The trade piece, I think, is big. Trade and tariffs. Actually, just recently, within the last couple of weeks, President Trump had pushed on and said, we're going to create bigger tariffs on China. That hit the semiconductor market pretty good, right? The kind of NVIDIA AI trade was a big one. And that really kind of threw a wet blanket to say, will that have an effect? So I think that's another piece that's out there. And then the border, right? That maybe there's economic implications on that, but obviously kind of two different perspectives from the two different candidates. So ultimately, like, what do we think of a Trump presidency? What do we think of a Harris presidency? In a Trump environment, I think you're going to see deregulation, lower taxes. I think that's going to help areas like financials and energy, right? He wants to kind of open things back up in the U.S. from an energy perspective. We've been down that road before. We've kind of seen how that's gone. And then with deregulation and financials, I think that will help the financial area to move. Potentially on the technology side, again, tariffs, and kind of limiting things, that could have an effect and bring down, the technology side of the market, which by and large has been the biggest performing area of the market. On the Harris side of things, higher taxes, and then I do think that financials, if the regulations stayed and things stayed tight, they would kind of continue to slog along. The same with energy. So from an investment perspective, I think there's two things we have to think about. The first one is there is no president that runs on a bad economy. Right? That is, in my opinion, their highest and best goal and opportunity is to say to the American people, look, here's what I've done to create economic growth expansion, which ultimately hopefully moves into the market side of things and growth. I don't care what side you're on. If you were invested and disciplined through the Trump regime, you made money. The same way on the Biden regime. So ultimately, in my opinion, yes, there's two very different ways in which politicians structure their candidacy, structure their presidency. But ultimately, it is the biggest goal for unemployment to be low and economic growth to continue. So I think that's a major part of really what we're working with here. All in all, portfolios being adjusted for those types of things. So again, we're not necessarily going to sit here and say, oh, if one candidate wins or the other, we're going to sell out of stocks or buy more bonds, etc. It's more of a function of what I mentioned. If one side wins, we think some areas might do better than others. Okay, let's tweak and move that around and not give up, hope in the stock market. The last thing, and I think the biggest thing with either candidate winning, is inflation in the Fed. We're still in that environment of inflation. We're not yet through this inflationary period. And so I still believe that either candidate winning, inflation is going to be the backdrop. If Trump wins, I think that's one of the things he's going to have to deal with the most, because the market already has this Trump trade intact. We're seeing markets grow with him being right now having statistics showing that he should win this election. Well, if we push more growth, that's not going to help inflation. That may make inflation worse. So there is a lot there that, again, in either scenario, we've got to be cautious and aware of. So again, not here to draw party lines or create favoritism one way or the other, but simply just kind of draw out the differences and how we look at portfolio construction as it relates to kind of a change or potential change in our presidency. So as always, we welcome conversations and are here to support. Thanks.